Philosophers talk to our times towards an ethnography of a self-poisoning mind. I want to come back onto why identity tends to lead to identity wars. Although for me it's a fact that's self-evident. But my partner, bless her, said, "You're going to need to explain that. I have a very strong feeling that I'm me, so why is that so bad?" So I'll come back to that. Let me start with where I often start, with a philosopher who I think you could probably blame Deleuze for the reason why I bang on about him so much, Leibniz. I discovered Spinoza by myself, but I'd read Leibniz before I read Deleuze's masterclass in how you rethink a philosopher, The Fold. I think I read it in about 1990, so 3 years or so after it came out. Does that sound sensible? About then. And it is such an incredibly powerful vision about what God was thinking at the beginning of creation, that it totally made me re-understand the boring philosopher who I had plodded through rebelliously, I mean Leibniz, and to see him in a much fresher, newer, wilder light. And it's particularly the vision. You see, in the end of the Theodicy, as Deleuze says, and really only there, Leibniz presents. The Theodicy is Leibniz's only properly published book, and as always, he publishes two. It's one of his two published books, and he only publishes weird books because his books are always in discussion with some minor. Well, with the new essay in Human Understanding, he's imagining he's talking to Locke. Locke never responds to Leibniz. And with this one, he's talking to Peter Pierre Bayle, author of an encyclopedia. And they're weird books. They're not always. I really like the new essay, but it wasn't the world's most straightforward read. And nor is the Theodicy. If you want to read Leibniz, start off with Deleuze's work, The Fold. Honestly, I mean it. It will teach you. It will not only if you've never come across Deleuze, it is one of his most imaginative and beautiful books, and easiest to read. But it will give you a total different impression on a philosopher that can easily be dismissed as some sort of Pangloss, the philosopher who believes in the best of all possible worlds, and not the master of thinking about identity and about how we become different. Because that is what Leibniz presents at the end of the Theodicy. Why did God create this world rather than others? It is because it is the one with the most matter in it. And what does that mean? Because there is no real matter. There is the most content in it, really. It's that each event, each point in someone's time, I cross the channel, I do not cross the channel. I flee to France because of Brexit, I do not flee to France because of Brexit. It all has consequences, and those consequences yet other consequences, until all of them bind together and create various possible universes. And we live in the one that God created. And that is a testimony then to the one identity, the one that had the most matter in it. And what Leibniz offers you then is a way to understand what you are through understanding, through how you are taking up what everything else is, reflecting and refracting on it, changing it and giving it back to the universe. To be is to be in the middle for everything else. It is to be in the middle for another. And you have to understand that is the point of what you are. And that are then loses its connotations. That is what you are always becoming. That which exists as a way for everything else to take you up and use you. And the choices you always have is, are you trying to understand that in terms of what makes the universe richer? Or some other story? And the point in the Theodicy, of course, is that those that tack other paths, Beelzebub, have lost sight of everything else. They act for them alone. And they understand what they are as a them. And this is that demand of being that separates, literally tears them away from what makes the universe what it actually is. That endless echo, one inside the other, that guarantees that this universe exists. This sense of being. This being caught up in the middle for everything else. A world of events where everything is forever changing and shifting what everything else could be, so that nothing is ever fixed in a straightforward, simple identity. Nothing is ever given in the here and now, which is the position that Deleuze uses Leibniz to hollow out and explore. And to be fair, Leibniz uses Leibniz to hollow out and explore, working out different ways that could be. It is then the theory of post-structuralism that I was going through yesterday. A theory that doesn't need to rest on identity, doesn't need to rest on the self, that frees the mind up to understand itself in myriad different paths, different ways it's caught up within a world. And it is that vision that I think is the best place to understand, to start to understand how we need to think about what we are, the kind of psychologies we need to understand for ourselves, not ones fixated with notions of identity, which are squeezed into our brains and then we discover, but rather understanding us in terms of perceptions that are caught up, reflecting universes, and actions that are caught up with others' reactions. And so in all of this, you can see why identity starts to me to be a bit of a villain. Because identity is what Beelzebub has. The minute I say, I want you to understand me this way, I have already limited the power of the universe. I've already shifted what it is. But more than that, the problem is, for Leibniz, perhaps more for me, is that I would normally think that a narcissist is the person who gives away the secret truth of most identities as we usually understand them. So identity exists not in anything I am. I don't wake up this morning and say, I shall be a philosopher this morning, or I shall be a storyteller, or I just sit and make masks. I really don't do that. I don't have an identity that's simply and straightforwardly defined, and nor do you. Come on, be honest, you don't. Identities are complicated constructions. For years and years and years, identities were defined by professions. They were defined by professions, nationalities, by an easy, quick, emotional set of, an easy, quick shorthand. A shorthand that allowed other people to reflect upon, that you to imagine other people understanding for you for what you did. And that's the key point about an identity. An identity isn't something that I am. It's something that I understand other people thinking that I am. And it is that loop back that makes it fold back on itself and become a true identity. It is not me that does it. It is me understanding that you understand that I am it that makes me a philosopher. Or not. That makes me how I understand what I am. And so, in the easy world of emotional shorthand, you could have a relatively straightforward thing. I would understand myself to be a writer. And I would understand you understanding what a writer was in the same way that I understood what I was. You get the point. In a world then where identity was defined by professions, it was relatively straightforward. Because I could imagine you looking at me in the same way that I imagined what I was looking at me. Because that was the power of the words. The words gave you a single refractive joint, a single point. But it's brutal. It couldn't be anything other than brutal. Because you were your identity. You could do this for certain things. And if we are going to say identity is the reflexivity of words, so that I can do it to myself as I understand you to do it to me, then there are only a certain number of things that humans can do that on. There's nationalities, there's professions, there's wealth, I think, probably. Only if it's particularly wealthy, though. So the wealthy people are very fond of doing this. They want you to understand them one way and get very, very, very angry if you don't. Why? Because their identity is defined on it. Why? Because their version of wealth is doing it. Wealth is a bit more ambivalent, in fact. That's one of the reasons I think rich men are so very, very brittle. They're much more anxious about how you understand their wealth, particularly the ones who are into con men. They want you to understand their wealth as they think it ought to be understood, so that they're demanding you reflect and refract back their identity. So identity is therefore very likely to be very aggressive. Why? Because actually holding down the meaning of words so that they mean to you as I want them, so I understand them meaning to you as I want them to understand meaning in myself, is actually a very difficult job. You have to go off and form empires, conquer nations, burn who you are into the blood of history. I'm on genealogy and morality here. Your identity has to be seared in blood across the world so that everybody else understands what you are as you understand what you are. And you short circuit the verbal loop. I think I've moved now. Okay, this is getting a little disorganized because I haven't properly thought it through. But let me go through the thinking it through quickly. So we have relatively straightforward professional identities. National identities become a little bit more complicated. They become a little bit more complicated because, again, you're demanding that everybody understands the British as the British want to be understood. And if people don't understand the British as the British want to be understood, that's very threatening to the British. So the British have to ensure that everyone understands them in a certain way. They conquer an empire then. They become a power. Because in becoming a power, they imagine that everybody else is seeing them in a certain way. And they have a reason for that imagination, a power on that imagination. And literally they can force it as well. They can force everybody else to understand them in that way, whether they want to or not. And this, of course, then leads on to the problem with modern identity theories. Modern identity theories are all caught in this paradox. I could wake up today and say whatever I like about myself, but it only becomes my identity if I make sure that you also agree with me, because that's what identity is. It exists in the reflexive back. To go back to my monad, you exist in the middle for anything else. So an identity is understanding understanding how you exist in the middle for somebody else, as if it was your property. It's a reflex. It's a reflux. It goes back on itself. And because it does that, because it is that difficult fold, it always has a level of aggression to it. Even the relatively straightforward, once you get beyond professions that are brutal, because you are educated to be a bricklayer and that is what you are, there is no flexibility. The minute you put flexibility on it, the minute you open up identity just a little bit and have it on the level of nations, so rich and poor, we're all in it together, it becomes brutal in another way. As demanding other people understand you in a certain way usually involves force. And now, it all involves force, always. Getting up and demanding that you perceive me as I wish to be perceived is fundamentally a very aggressive act and goes against the grain, the Leibnizian grain of what creation actually is. The sheer point of existence for me is that you can't control how other people see you. That's the point of it, and you have to run with that. You have to think about what that means. You might want to. You might present endlessly the same thing and hope that they do understand you that way and therefore you can form an identity over it. You might do. But you actually have no control over it. And I'm afraid with my full Leibnizian head on, I would say that you have no right to control over it. It's not a human right that we are given. You have no right to control how others see you, and therefore you have no right to understand how your identity exists, even to yourself. And that's a good thing, because that's the thing that makes sure that you have to change. You have to shift. You never can grow old in that sense, because you're always refounding and rethinking and rethrowing what you could be, as others understand you differently, and as you understand how others understand you differently. So for me, notions of identity, understanding how other people understand me, is always a bit of a shock, as a surprise, because I'm not trying to control it. It happens, and I don't mind it happening. Fine, it happens. One is for always understanding oneself as you think others understand you. But when you actually pick up other ways they understand you, it should be a shock. It should be a surprise. It could be a nice surprise or a nasty surprise, but it should be a surprise or a gift. You get my point. So my point is that any attempt to force identity on the world is an attempt to force others to make you, to understand you in very certain tropes, very certain means. And the minute you start doing that, then your notion of having an identity, that is your notion of the way you see you reflect, the way you are demanding that others reflect you back upon you, becomes a construct that is likely to be violent in various different ways, because you are in the end forcing how other people think. That is why Beelzebub is evil in Leibniz. And that for me is always why identity, that demand to be this person and you to understand me as this person. The rage for toleration, the demand for toleration almost, is problematic and sometimes extremely difficult because it forces on others perceptions they do not have, uses guilt, violence, uses guilt, shame, and the rest. And that puts us in a very funny, dangerous world. And the problem is, of course, that that world plays into all those politics of identity, as it can easily be flipped from the other side. And God knows help us if it is, because then we're in the identity wars of the 19th century once again. And really, believe me, as the planet warms up, nobody wants that.